What is up, everybody? It's Frenchie Powell with Permaculture Northeast, bringing you guys a video today on how to build a garden that will feed you and a bit of your family, not entirely, but a fair bit, for $50. So what are my choice crops? How do I go about constructing and maintaining this garden? That's what we're going to get into. And so for me personally, a little bit of background. I started gardening with a permaculture technique, and what that means is when we talk about permaculture, it's sustainable gardening in its truest sense, really, kind of a regenerative approach to both agriculture and how we maintain our home gardens. So we look at the woods, we look at the sides of roads, we look at the fields, and all of that grows without anybody plowing, without any fertilization, without anyone watering it, and it grows both in abundance and enough to feed all the wildlife that there is, and it continues to expand and adapt to its surroundings in a changing climate and a changing world that we live in. And so how do we take those same principles and bring them into a garden setting? And then what are those principles? How do we mimic them? And how do we then appropriately design our gardens around that? So one of these big ones that we're going to focus on is keeping the ground covered. So our garden always maintains some form of mulch on it, and if we see soil, we really try to cover it up as quick as possible. We can come in here, I'm in here with boots today just because the dew on the grass around, but we can come in here with shoes in the height of the wet season without walking out of our garden with mud caked on. It's really nice. And the plants love it because this mulch is always breaking down and feeding our soil. So we keep the ground covered, whether it's with a mulch or whether it's with a green ground cover. And then another one is we work with perennial systems. And so plants that we can put in the ground and will come back year after year to give us food and keep us going. And so it's a very low maintenance system once it's up and running. And the more we can gear our food systems towards perennial systems, the better it'll be for both us, our labor efforts, and for the environment. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start getting into a list of plants that I would grow if I were starting a garden for $50, a $50 budget. And first we'll go over what plants I would include, and then we'll go over how I would go about building it. So our first plant in this list is a cane fruit. And so for us, we've got this black raspberry bush. And everything's early spring, and so it's just coming in now. But this black raspberry patch is, I don't know, 6 by 6 maybe? But it was started from just one plant that was put in this garden 4 years ago, and it doesn't produce the first year. So that's one of the downsides with perennials. Your first years aren't your strong years for production. But ever since then, we have gotten quarts of berries from these plants. And a lot of what you will produce, if you're looking at producing your own food at home, a lot of your benefit comes from growing berry crops and crops that are really good in nutrition. And the reason is, if you were to buy the same things from the store, imagine buying blackberries or raspberries from the store, they taste like water. They're very flavorless, very nutritionless, probably grown in some Californian greenhouse. And so when you can grow those yourself, you're really giving yourself almost vitamin pills at that point. The nutrition that you're lacking elsewhere, and you're saving yourself a bunch of money versus if you tried to grow a garden full of wheat to make your own flour, you're not saving yourself a whole bunch. And so one of these plants, super cheap, and will get you started for many years to go. And anytime you want it, I've got right here another little black raspberry coming up. And what happened was one of these tips got into the ground and it started to root, and then it'll grow a whole new plant. And so you can easily replicate these. And if you don't have to worry about deer, go with the thornless variety. But we have deer around here, and our black raspberries have thorns. So you can take a pot, stick an end in a pot, and in a single year you can have 20, 30 potted raspberry plants to either give away, sell, easily, it's getting me with its thorns, easily recoup your investment, as well as produce a ton of food. So that's perennial number 1. Perennial number 2 is right around the corner. So perennial number 2 is not dandelion. Although I love dandelion and you should grow dandelion, the flowers, it takes only a week of eating very small nibbles of the leaves to get used to the bitterness. So once a week of eating the greens, you're used to the bitterness. Really good. Very nutritious. I've had this patch at least 4 years. But that's not our second perennial. Our second perennial is strawberries. So here we've got a patch that again has been here at least 4 years and produces berries every year. I'm chewing the dandelion, hold up. So our strawberry plants are easy to put in. When you put in one plant, it will multiply by runners. And from one plant you can have an entire patch by the end of the year. And so it's another kind of like our caneberries, our raspberries, our black raspberries, or blackberries. They spread very well, and that's another key that I would look for in getting plants for a very cheap garden is what's a investment that I can make that will replicate itself in abundance above and beyond. And strawberries really work well for that. Not only do they produce wonderful fruit, but they work as a great ground cover. When I plant, for example, our peas, I will put the pea seeds right in among the strawberries and they'll grow great. Right over here, it got hit by a little bit of frost, but we have a broccoli plant right in the strawberries. And actually, we had a frost come through and we had a broccoli plant right over here in the hay mulch, but that actually ended up dying because of the microclimate. It was a little colder on the mulch versus the strawberries, which had enough moisture to keep the broccoli plant alive. And so it's a great plant for interplanting your other crops. Produces food, as you can tell. You can walk on it. It'll do fine. It stays green all year round, even through winter. And so it's always putting sugars from its leaves into the soil to feed the biology of your soil all year round. And that's really important for healthy soil and a healthy soil life. So strawberries are our number 2 perennial. Another super cheap one you can buy anywhere. Just get a great variety that you love. Your June-bearing strawberries will bear once a year, and larger strawberries. Your ever-bearing strawberries will either bear 2 times a year or a little bit continuously throughout the year, but they bear smaller strawberries. So pick your preference, but a great add to the garden. So our third perennial is our grapevine. So this isn't in our garden, but we do have some growing around the perimeter of our garden. And this one is growing onto a post or a post trellis, and we actually trained it to grow up into our walnut tree just so it produces grapes up there. The birds eat the grapes, and I figure one more grape they eat up there isn't one they eat here, and it allows the grapevine to grow more as a grapevine would usually grow. But all you really need is one grapevine, and if you plant it and expand your trellis out and out, you can get one grapevine to cover the area of maybe 2 or 3 grapevines, as long as you put we don't have much around here, but if you put a really good mulch around your grapevine, and anytime a family pet dies, you bury it by the root system and constantly feed that grapevine, it'll produce wonderful grapes for you in season and a wonderful perennial to add. This grapevine has been here at least 20 years and still produces grapes every single year. It's a Concord grapevine seeded, and you could get seedless varieties, but there's a lot of grapevines that are used to the American climate, like the Concords or the Muscadines down south, or you can get some that came over as colonials with the Europeans, such as the European grapes. So, but you go back as far back as you want in history around the Mediterranean, and grapevines have been with us alongside. They're a wonderful food crop. I don't really dabble much in the winemaking or grape juice. I just eat my fill for breakfast. When the grapes are in season, I come out here, I'm just gorging myself on grapes. They produce an amazing abundance of food, and If you like looking into Greek recipes or Mediterranean recipes, you can do dolmas, I think it is, with the grape leaves, and another great nutritional boost. If you have rabbits or any small livestock, the leaves are also a great forage for them as well. So grapevines, also cheap, keep them very fed, and anytime you can put it near an area with water, grapevines will love you. If you don't have a stream or a pond on your property, find a downspout from your house, an area that's going to be getting a lot of water every single year coming by. And grapevines, with access to a large amount of water, will do great. They always in nature grow in areas with a high abundance of water. So don't let them sit in water, but they'll love you for that. So that's perennial number 3. All right, so we got up real close here to film our number 4 choice on perennials, and that is garlic chives. Garlic chives really supplement when you don't have garlic, an amazing flavor, especially with potatoes or anything like that. Anywhere you would use garlic, and they are really an unkillable plant. You can pull these out of the ground, put them in a 5-gallon bucket, leave them for a year, and they will still be growing. So garlic chives are super cheap, available at most garden centers, and they would definitely be an add for the little bit of spice and a lot of nutrition that they add. Definitely one of the top garden plants for herbs. Other herb would actually be, it's kind of poking up through here, oregano. Of all the herbs that I would grow, oregano definitely makes the top list because it really does well in a garden setting. We also have mint in here, and that's our next one after oregano actually. But oregano is able to compete with the mint. If I were to just try to plant thyme in here, the thyme is not competitive. It would grow across the ground, it would start to be nice, but as soon as another plant comes in, it'd be, oh no, I'm going to die, and it would give up. But oregano grows up tall. I mean, all of these dead stalks are from last year's oregano when it went to flower and seed, and it really does compete well and is a wonderful spice to add in. But after oregano, like I said, we've got peppermint. And I also have some wild garlic chives. If you have wild garlic chives on your property, use them. They are delicious with potatoes. But peppermint, I've got peppermint all over. I've actually got another bed over there where I've got rhubarb, a fig tree, and peppermint will come up in that whole bed. Peppermint's one of those great ones because once you plant it, it's there forever, and you have as much beverage of peppermint tea as you could want. It's really huge in Morocco and around northern Africa, and it is just so delicious. You know, we got more strawberries in here too. And yeah, once you have it, enough tea to, on tap for your family for years on end. Comes back every year. Great perennial. And we can just barely, we lucked out in our filming, we can just barely see our next perennial coming up. And that perennial is asparagus. Asparagus is wonderful in the nutritional content because it comes up with so many minerals right at a time when people are mostly mineral deficient, right coming out of winter. And asparagus is one that you plant it and it can be around for years to come. There are many times when asparagus plants are found on really old homesteads, many times after the homesteaders themselves are gone. It's a great heritage plant that you put it in the ground. Its roots can, in ideal soils and moisture conditions, go down up to 20 feet deep, which is incredible for a plant. And all that energy is just coming up in those fresh spears every single year. And so you harvest them as long as they are thicker than like one of your fingers, and they are so delicious. I hated asparagus until I grew it myself, but when you grow it yourself, it's so sweet, surprisingly, and it's unlike anything else. So it barely ever makes it to cooking. I just pick it and eat it raw. It's so good. The only problem with asparagus is you'll never have enough. So you may plant it once, but then you'll always want to buy more and plant more. So when it comes to planting asparagus, don't buy all the stuff that you see online where you have to dig like a 6-foot grave and pile in a bunch of compost and spread out every last root and make sure the crown's facing upright. It's not going to be worth it. Just what we do here is stick a shovel in the ground, open up the ground, throw the asparagus crown in so that the asparagus crown is facing upright, cover it back in, or sometimes we've dug post holes and put in the asparagus and just fill it back in with dirt. It really doesn't need to be all that complicated, but asparagus is one of those ones that comes up very strong. So you can cover it with a foot or two of mulch, and it will still poke through that mulch. And since it's such a not very heavy feeder, but it loves extra nutrition, it'll do all the better for you the more mulch or organic matter that you can give it. Just don't buy any synthetic fertilizers. I never buy synthetic fertilizers just because they're expensive and sometimes they do more harm than good. So that was asparagus, and those kind of wrap up our perennial list. Now we're going to move into annuals, but there's some key things that you should know when it comes to planting annuals. For one, the ones that have made this list are sometimes perennialized. The other ones that I've chosen are super easy to save your own seeds. And the reason that can sometimes be important is, especially with changing climate, specific conditions to your farm or to mine, when you have a successful plant that grows and does well, when you're able to save those seeds from that crop and replant that, then you have a variety that is able to accustom itself to your growing conditions. And you're more likely to get better quality produce year after year as your species of plants really hone in on your specific location versus going and buying a pack of burpee seeds every single year that who knows where they were grown, who knows what the conditions were, and who knows what they were given and how they were pampered. And now they're in your garden and who knows how they'll do. So, but you gotta start somewhere. Get the seed packets, super cheap. But without further ado, let's get into our annuals. So the first annual that we are going to start with is garlic. Garlic is amazing. I use it in most everything that I cook, where I add herbs and spices. I love it. And this is so easy. It's probably one of the easiest crops, except maybe peppermint, where you can easily become self-sufficient for it. And it's not, a huge money saver. Garlic is super cheap in the stores. Why would you buy it? Well, in this little patch that extends for a little bit, we grow enough garlic to feed our family and enough to feed another family. So all it started with was 2 years ago, I bought 3 bulbs of garlic in the store, and it's super cheap. 2, maybe 3 bulbs of garlic, 69 cents each. This will be enough to get you started to plant yourself a year's worth of garlic. With those 3 bulbs, I then took individual cloves, stuck them in the ground, and I think I had around 40 or so and they did really well. And so from that 3 cloves, we got around 40 cloves, from the 3 bulbs, we got around 40 bulbs, and we're still eating from that. And what I did the next year was I took double that from what we had harvested and replanted that. And so that's what these guys are. They're our these guys are our second generation of garlic, and they're doing absolutely wonderful. I can't wait to harvest them later this year, but they get planted in fall. All right, they're ones that have sit over winter in your garden bed. We mulched it in fall, but most of the mulch has gotten eaten by our soil organisms. You could come back through and mulch around them. No harm done. But yeah, they love it. I love it. Garlic is what we're starting with our annuals. Super easy to save, super economical when it comes to self-sufficiency with it, and it doesn't take a lot of space. Our next one, let's go check out. So potatoes also can be super cheap from the grocery store. Bag of potatoes, you're gonna want any potatoes work. You're just gonna want the whole potato, cheap as you can go. This is $3.99 for the whole thing. This is what we got. We've got a 10-pound bag of potatoes. one of these will do it for you. You could do red potatoes, white potatoes, russets, whichever you'd like. So now let's go ahead and check out how we plant our potatoes. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take these potatoes, we'll just put them on top of the ground. We're here at we're still at the beginning of April, and the grass has mostly sent its energy up from the root system into its leaves, and so it's the perfect time to put our potatoes on the ground, grab a bunch of hay, and cover them. Now the grass, since most of its energy has just been spent producing its spring leaves, won't have much energy to poke through your grass. If you cover in fall, it'll have a lot of energy to come back through all of your mulch. But we're just gonna take the potatoes, put them about 10 inches to a foot apart. And the reason I don't cut my potatoes is if I plant the whole potato, a large potato, I'll get a lot of greens and have a larger harvest. If I cut it into a small potato, well then I'll get a small harvest. It's pretty simple. The plant gets its energy, its initial energy, from the potato itself, and so if you only give it a small reserve to grow a plant, well, it's going to grow a small plant. So don't bother cutting. Get larger harvests. Put your potatoes out. And you can't really go too deep, because for those of us who have seen potato shoots, they'll grow very long just in the bag itself. Not covering the bag. That won't grow. So I'll go on and cover the rest of these. But let's go ahead and look at what a finished bed looks like. So this is what the potato bed, when it's done, looks like. We've got a little over a foot of hay covering our potatoes. Just a circular fence so that I have the most area in the middle for the least amount of perimeter. And that's it. This fence doesn't have a gate because it doesn't need one. The next time I will visit this bed is harvest time. Until then, I'm not going to water, not going to weed, not going to add any additional fertilizer, I'm not going to mound anything up. This is pretty much it. So now that this is done, I can kick back, relax when it comes to potatoes for the rest of the year, and return once the plants die back for a pretty good harvest. And when it comes to planting potatoes, that's all you need to do. So when you plant your potatoes, you can then reap a huge harvest, and then from there, save your best potatoes and replant them next year. Or when you harvest, sometimes you can dig a little bit of a hole, put your largest potato back in the ground, because again, largest will give you a best harvest, and then lightly cover it and then pile mulch on top. Then it'll come back automatically once the soil warms up the following year. We've actually just started getting some of our potatoes popping up that we had planted last year. They are perfectly designed to overwinter in the ground, and anyone who's planted potatoes in the dirt and not harvested them all realizes you'll get volunteers next year. And so things that volunteer easily are practically a perennial in my mind. Even though they're technically not, they're a pseudo-perennial. And so potatoes are a great one, a great starch to add to the garden as compared to our typical nutrition and vegetables and fruits. So along with potatoes, another one that we're going to be trying growing the same way is sweet potatoes. Something I would definitely grow a lot more of if I were further south, but I still love them so much that I grow them up here in the north. They can be a little difficult to cure after harvest, but I think it's worth it. And the greens are also edible. They work great as a cooked herb, and so we use them as well. So sweet potatoes would be, I guess, our third annual that we would go with. And they can be cheap too. 2 sweet potatoes. Don't need to be the perfect sweet potatoes that you could find, but just enough to get us going. 69 cents a pound, can't beat that. After sweet potatoes, we get to our trellis, and this is for our beans. And you can do dry beans. We do dry beans, and we eat a lot of dry beans, and so it helps to grow them yourself. But if you're looking for something really easy to get a high yield, get some pole beans that are green beans. Now you can look into some online sites, whether it's the MI Gardener or Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, and you can get some different colored beans, and they're really cool. But if you get a pole bean and you build a simple trellis, we built ours out of bamboo and baling twine. But you can use fencing. I mean, we could even grow beans on, and we clearly did. This is from last year. You can grow your beans onto anything that it is able to twine around and climb. Native Americans would do it on corn plants. The limit's the sky. So, but we're going to be doing green beans on our trellis here, where it can grow up the bamboo, over, and then hang over. And green beans are amazing because as long as you keep harvesting them, they keep producing. Okay, if you get a bush bean variety, it's harvest one time. But you can extend your yield if you have pole beans. They keep producing, and we will harvest until the frost comes and kills our plants. And you can freeze them. You can can them. We don't, but you can. You can. Hey, but green beans feed you a lot for the plant. They're a wonderful addition. They fixate nitrogen into the soil, and so you can have your sweet potatoes running across the ground and your green beans growing up a trellis. It's a great win-win. We have kale actually underneath our trellis, so that by the time the green beans are going to be growing up in the heat of summer, they will start to shade our kale and protect it from some of that really brutal summer heat. So after green beans, our next annual is the classic tomato. So we like to do cherry tomatoes. At least I like to do cherry tomatoes. They're so easy to pick off. You can get thousands of cherry tomatoes off of just a couple, let's say 100 some square feet. So 10 by 10. Something really small relatively to a garden. You can get thousands of cherry tomatoes. We worked on freezing cherry tomatoes last year. They froze pretty well. But otherwise, you can do Romas, which are kind of a medium size, or you can go up to your, larger tomatoes. Here in the northern climates, they really do well as well. So, but tomatoes are one that yield heavily, do really well in a garden setting, and it's classic. You use it in pasta, you use it in, pasta. We use it with our spaghetti squash. It's a delicious fruit that grows from the garden, and yeah, one of the nice things about tomatoes is it reseeds itself readily too, especially if you do cherry tomatoes. The bad ones that fall to the ground will come right back up in the same spot next year, and so they do, they're self-seeding annuals, but they're again one of those pseudo perennials where they're back. And so once we planted them last year, we didn't buy any cherry tomatoes, and they came back and yielded heavily for us again. And we've even started projects around the farm where we're taking them into areas outside the garden, whether it's hedgerows or certain areas in the field, and planting them out there to see which ones survive in a wild setting. And they do. We had some turn out last year, and they did pretty well. So we're hopeful for this year. After tomatoes, though, our next annual would be lettuce, or some form of spinach or green, your choice. Lettuce I like because it takes a small patch to yield a great deal. And you can just snack on that all the time, make salads to your heart's content. And if you let it bolt and let it go to seed, if it self-seeds, it oftentimes comes back the next year. And so we had lettuce last year that had survived by seed through winter and come back the following year. And hey, free lettuce, I'll take it. So lettuce is a great one. It's great to have those leafy greens in your diet, in your family's diet, for the overall health of your family. And so super cheap, super easy, gotta do it. And then finally, our last annual and our last crop in this $50 garden has to be some form of squash. Now, if you're looking for a summer yielder, cucumbers work great. If you can swing it in your budget to get, a summer squash and a winter squash, there's tons of combinations you can do. For a summer squash, you've got things like yellow squash, zucchini, and cucumbers. All are very heavy yielders, and cucumbers you can train to grow up trellises very easily. Winter squash, a favorite of mine is butternut, just because it's got a big neck full of meat content, you know. It feeds you well, and it lasts all the way through winter, which is nice. Another favorite of mine is spaghetti squash, just because it's versatile in the kitchen and it's really not hard to cook up and makes a delicious meal. But other ones you could do are pumpkin or acorn squash. There's so many varieties out there, Blue Hubbard, that are really great in the garden, but they take up a bit of space. So if you're really cramped for space, you might want to go with a zucchini or a summer squash of some sort, or cucumbers that when they're in season, you'll eat them till they're coming out your ears. They're so prolific that you'll have more than you know what to do with. And so, but that's our list of vegetables for our garden. Now, when it comes to actually building the garden, I am a huge proponent of mulch. Like we said at the beginning of the video, it reduces the need for weeding. You never till, so you're not killing worms in the soil and soil life organisms, and you're not compacting the soil. And you're constantly feeding the soil and feeding it. You don't have to water. The list goes on and on. So I really promote mulch. But how do you plant into mulch? Well, there's some things to know with mulch. One, never till it in. If you till in whether wood chips or hay, it robs all of the nitrogen from the soil in the decomposition process, and your plants will just be yellow and won't really grow. So always just lay your mulch out on top. Now, if you have kitchen scraps, that's great. You can pull the mulch back, put your kitchen scraps down, and cover them. Go deeper than that. But if it's hay, lift it back. I mean, we even had some grass that was growing here. We laid it down flat. We've already got wood louse, little pill bug there. We've got a worm coming to munch on things. Go back, little guy. We just laid our weed down flat, covered with hay, and that'll decompose and feed our garden as well. So, but how do we plant into it? Well, if you have a little start, like you buy a little 6-pack of tomatoes from, your garden center, it's really easy. You just dig down till you find soil, take your trowel, make a hole, put the plant in, and then tuck it nicely back in. If you're doing seeds, you pull back all of the mulch until you expose the soil. You can either push your seeds into the soil if it's loose enough, or you can lay your seeds on top of the soil and then lightly cover with mulch. That was a theory that we had a couple years ago that we decided to practice. I mean, our thought was, out in nature, nobody's tilling or burying seeds. I mean, unless it's a squirrel and a walnut. I mean, nothing really gets buried. So how do all these seeds germinate in, say, a field? And what it is these seeds land on top of the plants, usually, and then the wind blows, so they fall down to the ground, and then winter comes and all that plant matter dies on top of that seed. It's a mulch. It's not a thick mulch. I mean, you're not talking a couple feet thick, but it's a light mulch. And come warm weather, those seeds germinate and poke through that light mulch. So, when our mulch is pulled back, we lay our seeds on top of the soil, not burying them at all, and then lightly dust over them with mulch, whether it's wood chips or whether it's hay. We did that for our peas, and we've already got our peas coming up through the mulch. These were not buried at all. It's super easy to do it this way rather than trying to cut a row down through the soil or burying each and every seed. So it's a super simple method. It does work, and one I highly recommend. Once you have your garden mulched and your seeds and plants planted, you can kind of just step back from it. Some weeds will keep coming through. Sometimes you'll have persistent grasses that want to keep coming through, or thistles that are able to poke through. Even if you had 6 feet of mulch, thistles will come through it. You can cut them back and just use them as mulch too. Some people really like just cutting back the weeds as opposed to digging them out. Or you could try to dig them out. Eventually, your mulch gets your soil so loose, weeds just pull right out, and it's so nice. especially having been in a really clay-rich soil here in South Central PA. But mulch is great for loosening the soil, makes easy weeding. If you have a weed, now this is purple dead nettle, so I like taking the little flowers off and eating them. You get a little burst of sweet. But if you didn't like purple dead nettle, my wife and I, we like it, but say you didn't like it, cover it up. It's not there, it's getting a lot less light, so at least you know it's not growing vigorously. And it breaks down just as easily, like we did with the grass. And so this is how I garden, guys. It's been working for years, and we've had amazing yields because of it. It's constantly growing in fertility, in abundance. Things like this I sometimes need to cut back because they grow so well, but I'm okay with that. It's low maintenance. We have over doubled our cultivated size from when I was growing up on my parents' property, rototilling and weeding and watering. It was so difficult. But this is easy. It's relaxing. It makes it nice to be in the garden again. And so this has been our garden under $50. I'm Frenchie Powell with Permaculture Northeast, guys. I don't really have anything to sell you. If you like what you've seen, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Comment in the videos so that they're able to get out there and help more people. We've got a wealth of information recorded on YouTube for people like you looking for simple gardens and a simplistic way of growing things sustainably. And so I hope you check us out. I hope your gardens work really well for you this upcoming year. This has been Frenchie Powell. I love you guys. Frenchie out.